ಸಂಸಾರದಾವ ನಲಲಿದಲೋಕ ತ್ರಣಯ ಕಾರುಣ್ಯ ಘನ ಘನಾತ್ವಂ ತ್ರಣಯ ಕಾರುಣ್ಯ ಘನಾತ್ವಂ ಪ್ರಾಪ್ತಸ್ಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಗುಣಾರ್ಣವಸ್ಯ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀ ಚರಣಾರವಿಂದಂ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಚರಣ महाप्रभु कीर्तन नृत्य गीता वादित्र माद्यान मनसोरसेना प्रभु कीर्तन नृत्य गीता वादित्र मनसोरसेना रोमांचकं पाशुतरंगभाजो वंदे गुरु श्री चरणारविंदं रोमांचकं पाशुतरंगभाजो वंदे गुरु श्री चरणारविंदं श्री विग्रहाराधन नित्य नाना शृंगारतन्मन्दिरमर्जनाधो विग्रहाराधन नित्य नाना शृंगारतन्मन्दिरमर्जनाधो युक्तस्य भक्तां शनियुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं तस्य भक्तां शनियुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं चतुर्विधा श्री भगवत्प्रसाद स्वाद्वन तृप्तान् हरिभक्तसङ्घान् श्री भगवत्प्रसाद स्वाद्वन हरिभक्तसङ्गान् कृतैव तृप्तिं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपारा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां माधवयोरपारा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां प्रतीक्षणा स्वाधनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्री रविन्दं निकुञ्जयूनो रतिकेलि सिद्धै यायालिभिर्युक्तिरपेक्षणीया निकुञ्जयूनो रतिकेलि सिद्धै यायालिभिर्युक्तिरपेक्षणीया तत्रातिदक्षादतिवल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं वल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं साक्षादरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रैरुक्तस्तथा भाव्यत एव सद्भिः किन्तु प्रभो या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादान् नगति कुतोऽपि यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादान् नगति कुतोऽपि ध्यायां स्तुवं तस्य यस्य स्त्रीसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् यस्य श्रीसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे श्रीचरणरविन्दं श्रीचरणरविन्दं नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा जय चैतन्य चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि वृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Jaya Radha Nila Madhav Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Nila Madhav Nila Jaya Radha Shyam Sundar Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Shyam Sundar Shyam Sundar Shri Radhe, Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadrama Jaya Sudarshan Chakra, Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadrama Chakra, Jaya Sitaram Sitaram Jaya Lakshmana Hanuman, Jaya Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Jaya Lakshmana Hanuman, जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह 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 जय लक्ष्मी सिंह जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल
Namaste Narasimhaya Namaste Narasimhaya Praladadayine Praladadayine Hiranyakashipurvachaha Hiranyakashipurvachaha Silantankanakalaye Silantankanakalaye Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha Ito नरसिंहा परतो नरसिंहा यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहा यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहा बाहिर्नरसिंहा हृदये नरसिंहा बाहिर्नरसिंहा हृदये नरसिंहा नरसिंहमादिं शरणं प्रपते नरसिंहमादिं शरणं प्रपते तव करकमलवरे नाकाम् अभूतशृङ्गादलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गां केशवतीर्थ नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे तव करकमलवरे अभूतशृङ्गादलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवतीर्थ नरहरिरूपा केशवतीर्थ नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जय श्री नरसिंहदेव भगवान की जय जय श्री प्रहलाद महाराज की जय जय श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय
वृंदाय तुलसीदेव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च विष्णुभक्तिपदे देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः
वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियाय केशवस्य च विष्णुभक्तिप्रति देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः
वृंदाय तुलसीदेव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च विष्णुभक्तिपदे देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः
वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियाय केशवस्य सर्वस्य च विष्णुभक्तिप्रतिदेवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः।
वृंदा देवी तुलसी
तुलसीदेवी
महारानी
महारानी
की
की
जय।
जय।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ये अभिलाषी राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ये अभिलाषी जे तुम्हारा शरण लोय तारा वंश पूर्ण होय कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावनवासी मोरा ये अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियोवास ये अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियोवास नयने हेरिबो सदा जुगल रूपरासी এই নিবেদন দ্বার সাকিরানুগত করো সেবাদি কর দিয়ে করো নিজ দাসী दीन कृष्ण दास कोई जन मोर होय दीन कृष्ण दास कोई जन मोर होय श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा नवासी श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा नवासी यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि तद्यधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani. Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Vrinda Devi, Jaya Bhakti Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Bhakti Devi, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Deve Satyavatai Namo Namaha. Shri Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Deve Satyavatai Namo Namaha. Shri Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Deve Satyavatai Namo Namaha. Shri Vrinda Devi Tulsi Maharani ki.
Beloved of Krishna, I bow before you. My desire is in the service of Shishirada and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you has reached the field. Bestow mercy upon him and make him a resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also grant me residence in the precious groves of Shiva and Damodar. Thus this my actions shall always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. Follower of the Pahar temples of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen lowly from the Krishna tree. May I always swim in the love of Radha and Govinda. There are 10 fences in the matter of chanting holy names that should be avoided, and they are as follows. 1. To blaspheme devotees have dedicated life for the propagation of the name of the Lord. 2. To consider the name of the demigods like Lord Shiva or Brahma or equal to independent name of Vishnu. 3. To disobey the order of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature pursuant to Vedic version. 5. To consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to the imagination. 6. To to give some interpretation to holy name the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities and strength of chanting holy name. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna one of the auspicious ritualistic activities offered in Vedas as fruit activities, karma, ganda. 9. To instruct a faithless person about the glory of holy name. 10. To not complete faith in the chanting holy name and to maintain material attachment in understanding so many instructions on this matter.
It is also an offense to be knit into while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must guard against these offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna, Prema. Now I offer my respect. Peace of the Lord, Jesus. Vancha Kripa Sindhubhyev cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Nanda Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki Jai. Chato Darpanamarjanam Bhavamahadavagni Nirvapanam Shreya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Pratipadam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Jayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam Nanamakari Bauda Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatrarpita Niyamita Smaranena Kala Etadrishi Tava Kripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaivam Idrisham Miha Janina Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Vajagadisha Kamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishware Bhavatat Bhaktirahaitu Kitvayi Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitamam Vishame Bhavambudau Krupaya Tava Pada Pankaja Stitaduli Sadrisham Vichindaya Nayanam Galadashudaraya Vadanam Gadgadarudaya Gira Pulakar Nichitam Vapu Kada Tavanama Grahane Bhavishyati Yugayitam Nimashena Chakshusha Pravashyayitam Shunyayitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Virahenami Asviya Vapadaratam Vinastuma Adarshanam Marmahatam Karotuva Yata Tatava Vidadatulam Pato Mat Prananatastu Sayevana Paraha Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Ki Jai.
Glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust
Accumulated for years and extinguished the fire of conventional life of living for that. This Sankirtana movement is a prime benediction for humanity at large because it sets the basic benediction. It is a life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fulfill the nectar for which are all these anxious. Oh my Lord, Thursday beings and Thursday of hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, we invest all your transcendental energies. There are not given hard and fast rules for chanting these names. Oh my Lord. Oh, but I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige. One should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service worth after birth. Oh, Son of Krishna, somehow or other falls in social person. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the adults at your daughter's feet. Oh, and when my eyes be decorated with rivers of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name. And will you say, stand there and there is addition. So, feeling your separation.
I'm considering a moment maybe like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I'm feeling vacant in the world of your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and he shall remain so even if I cannot flee by his grace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present with him. He is completely free to do anything and everything for his
always
my
my
worship
worship, Lord,
unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Exhaustikam ki jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya Guru Mani Pujari Shri Guru Pranama prayers.
Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana-Shalakaya Chakshur-Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatanitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parjana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakanvitamsha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Pasasade Satarini Namaste Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Namini Shivarsavani Devi Dayataya Kripadaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Madhur Ujjvala Premadya Shri Gurunuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virupa Siddhanta Dvantaharine Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sakshat Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachidanandanamine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gaura Vir Bhavagumestvam Nirdeshta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhuma Sri Jagannathayate Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyev cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauritrase Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhakta-avtaram Bhakta-gyam Namahami Bhakti-saktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jaitam Suratur Pandur Malamandamate Gati Matsarva Swapadambo Jo Radha Madanamopano Divya Dvindaranya Kalpratamaha Shrimad Radha Simhasanastito Shrimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prastadibi Sevimanu Smarami Shrimad Rasa Saram Vivam Sivatatastita Karsandrina Swanir Gopir Vinantakshviyestuna Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Brahmasmriti Ki Jai Ishwara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Chintamani Prakarsatmaskalpa Vriksha Lakshavriteshu Surabhira Palyantam Lakshmi Sahasrasata Sambrahma Sevyamanam Namadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Venam Kvanantam Arvindadalayataksam Parhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpakoti Kamani Abhisesa Sobha Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kalasat Vanamali Vamsi Ratam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shamam Jivangala Latanita Prakasam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Anjaniyasya Sakalendriya Vittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalayanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujjvala Vigrahasya Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam Adhyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam cha Vedesu Durlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakto Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Shatavatsara Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Munipungamanam Sophyasya Prapadam Chintyatatve Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sorachaitam Jagadanta Kotyam Yaschakti Rasti Jagadanta Chayayadanta Andantarasta Parvanu Chayantarastam Govinda Madi Purusham
Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Vyadbhava Bhavita Diyo Manajastadaiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Pusa Sutta Yameva Pratidashtavanti Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitam Gavya Eva Charupataya Kalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Santaksa Deva Hridesa Vilokanti Yam Shama Sundaram Chintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Vinitistan Anavataram Akaloka Ganesa Kinchu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramampamam Yo Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, yielding all desire in the abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing on his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head decked with peacock feather, with the figure of beauty tinged with the hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cubits. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, round whose neck is swinging a garland of flowers, beautified with the moon locket, whose two hands are adorned with the flute and jeweled ornaments, who always revels in pastimes of love, whose graceful threefold bending form, Shamsundar, is eternally manifest. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, substantiality, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of that transcendental figure possesses in himself the full-fledged functions of all the organs, and eternally sees, maintains, and manifests the infinite universes, both spiritual and mundane. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas, but obtainable by pure, unalloyed devotion of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to decay, is without a beginning, whose form is endless, who is the beginning and the eternal Purusha, yet he is a person possessing the beauty of blooming youth. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. He is an undifferentiated entity, as there is no distinction between potency and the possessor thereof. In his work of creation of millions of worlds, his potency remains inseparable. All the universes exist in him, and he is present in his fullness in every one of the atoms that are scattered throughout the universe at one and the same time. Such is the primeval Lord whom I adore. I adore the same Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose praise men who are imbued with devotion sing the mantra suktas told by the Vedas by gaining their appropriate beauty, greatness, thrones, conveyances, and ornaments. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm, Goloka, with Radha, resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities, in the company of her confidants, Shakis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever-blissful spiritual rasa. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Sham Sundar, Krishna himself, with inconceivable and innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eye of devotion, tinged with the salve of love. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna, and the different avatars in the world in the form of Rama, Nishinga, Vamana, etc., as his subjective portion. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we're going to do a little review of from the beginning of the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and then continue into this chapter from verse 19 onward. So, in the beginning of this chapter, a question is asked: what is Prakritim? that is the material nature. What is Purusham, the enjoyer, which is where there are two enjoyers. The jiva is the false enjoyer, and the Supreme Personality Godhead, or Paramatma, is the real enjoyer. Kshetram, the field of activity, which is the body. And Kshetragyam, the knower of the field, one who knows the jiva and super soul, one who knows the body and jiva and super soul. And then jnanam, knowledge, understand the difference between the body and the soul. And gyayam, the object of knowledge, know Krishna as the source of the material nature and body, and also of the jiva and the super soul. Okay, so that is the questions: Prakriti, Purusha, Kshetram, Kshetragyam, Jnanam, and Gyayam. Gyayam means the object of knowledge. And then the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the knower of the body, the jiva, and the position by which he can understand the Supreme Lord are described. What is the position that you can understand the Supreme Lord? You have to surrender to a Guru and Krishna. Then the middle 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality Godhead and the relationship between the individual soul and the super soul is, in regard to devotional service, are described. So the only way of understanding Krishna is to surrender to Guru and Krishna and engage in devotional service. Otherwise, it's not possible. And then the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are all about supplemental knowledge and how one can become completely immersed in devotional service and not be influenced at all by the modes of material nature, and thus be able to go back to Godhead. Okay, now if we go to the 19th verse of the 13th chapter. So after that, then the next thing is understanding what's called Jnanam, Gyayam, and Gyanagamyam. That's the 18th verse. So Jnanam means the object of knowledge. So what is the object? I'm sorry. Jnana means knowledge. So what is knowledge? There's 20 points of knowledge. Then there's the object of knowledge. That's the 20 points. And then Gyanagamyam is the goal of knowledge, and that is to know Krishna. All right? So you have Jnana, which is knowledge in general, and then Gyayam, which is the object of knowledge. That's the 20 points of knowledge. And then Gyanagamyam is the goal of knowledge, which is Krishna himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay. Now we come to the text 19. It says, thus, the field of activity is the body. Knowledge and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. So, what does that mean? The field of activity is the body. And knowledge is the 20 points of knowledge that we studied. And then the knowable is to know Jivatma and Paramatma, and ultimately know Krishna, who is the source of Paramatma, Jivatma, and the material nature and the body. And therefore, Krishna is saying here, only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature meaning the spiritual world and eternal life. Okay, so then we begin a new section of this 13th chapter, and that is from text 20 on. and it says, material nature, pakritim purusham chaiva vidi anadi ubhav api. Vikarams cha gunams chaiva vidi prakriti sambhavam. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of nature are products of material nature. Okay, now this is a very interesting verse, and sometimes people get a little confused by it. So let's understand what it says. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. That means matter is eternal and the living entity is eternal. That's what it means. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Okay, now that requires a little bit of thought. Their transformations. Well, what's transforming? Well, material nature is constantly transforming. And the living entities are also transforming. You're changing your body all the time, right? And material nature is always transforming. Like a tree grows and produces fruit. That fruit is a transformation of the energy of the tree. You see. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. So all these transformations going on in the body of the living entity and in all the bodies of the living creatures, including the plants, and the modes of matter, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are products of material nature. That means that they are products of the inferior spiritual energy, or apara prakriti of Lord Krishna. However, the living entity is not part of the inferior spiritual energy. It's part of the superior spiritual energy. But as long as the living entity is attracted to sense gratification, they remain locked up or prisoners of the material nature due to the modes of material nature that control them and their actions. Once they transcend the desire for sense gratification and work only to please the senses of Krishna, they're no longer influenced by the modes of material nature and birth, death, old age, and disease. They are fully engaged in devotional service. So now we're going to read this purport because it's very important. And it says, this is chapter 13, verse number 20. By the knowledge given in this chapter, one can understand the body as the field of activities and the knowers of the body, both the individual soul and the supersoul. The body is the field of activity and is composed of material nature. The individual soul that is embodied and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. So when it says enjoying the activities of the body, actually it's suffering the activities of the body, although they think it's enjoying. Just like people go to Mexico to enjoy, and then they end up being killed. So what enjoyment did they actually have? A lot of Americans are being killed now in Mexico because the cartels, previously the cartels never killed any tourists, but now they're killing the tourists. So all these young kids go there, well, the college kids go there to have sense gratification. They end up dead. So what kind of enjoyment is that? So the body is the field of activity and is composed of material nature. The individual soul is embodied and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. He is one knower, and the other knower is the supersoul, or Krishna, or Paramatma. Of course, it is to be understood that both the supersoul and the individual entity are different manifestations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the supersoul is in the category of his personal expansion. Now, when we refer to a living entity as the energy of the Lord, what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that we can do things, but we can either do things in Maya, for Maya, or do things for Krishna. So, if we do things for Maya, we remain in the cycle of birth and death. If we do things for Krishna, we are liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So we are called energy. We're an individual, and we have eternal individual identity as a jiva. But we are considered the energy of the Lord. Now, if you understand that you belong to the Krishna, then you only use this energy that we have in the service of the Lord. But if you misunderstand that, and you think, no, I'm meant to enjoy this material world, to be a little Krishna myself, then you get trapped by Maya, or we get trapped by Maya, and we suffer birth after birth in the material world. So everything depends on how we use the energy in this body. And the energy is coming from the jiva itself and supported by the Paramatma. So it says, the body is the field of activity and is composed of material nature. So that means that we are not this body. We are the soul in the body that gives the energy to the body to function. The body by itself does not have energy. Just like a car motor does not have the energy to run unless there's a battery. If you don't have a battery, it doesn't matter how good your car is, it's not going to run. You need a source of energy. So the source of energy in the body is the soul and the super soul. So the individual soul that is embodied and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. He is one knower, and the other is the super soul. Of course, it is to be understood that both the super soul and the individual entity are different manifestations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the super soul is in the category of his personal expansion. Both material nature and the living entity are eternal. That is to say that they existed before the creation. Now, this is something that the Christians would deny. They would say only Jesus existed before the creation. The material manifestation is from the energy of the Supreme Lord, and so also are the living entities. But the living entities are of the superior energy. Both the material nature is the inferior energy. Both the living entities and the material nature existed before this cosmos was manifested. In other words, they're both eternal, the inferior material energy and the jiva. Material nature was absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, and when it was required, it was manifested by the agency of Mahatattva. Similarly, the Mahatattva is the manifest form of the sum total of material energy, in which the time element and the modes of material nature are acting. But when it goes further back to the pradhana, that's when the time factor and the modes of material nature are not acting. Everything comes to absolute standstill, right? And that's called pradhana. The totality of the material nature comes to absolute stillness or stop, right? Waiting for the next expansion or the next creation. So you have pradhana and you have mahatattva. Similarly, the living entities are also in him, and because they are conditioned, they are averse to serving the Supreme Lord. So we all are part and parcels of Krishna. Thus, they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky. But as long as we are desiring sense gratification, we stay prisoners in the material world. And what's the alternative? We work for the sense gratification of Krishna's senses. Then we're liberated from the material world, even while we're in the material world. Thus, they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky. But with the coming forth of material nature, these living entities are again given a chance to act in the material world and prepare themselves to enter into the spiritual world. That is the mystery of this material creation. Yeah, that's a mystery, because most people think, no, I came to this material world in order to enjoy myself. They don't realize that Krishna keeps giving you many chances to be liberated, life after life. So this is something that Christians reject, and they say you only have one life. Either you make it or you break it. And that's mean. See, Krishna is not a mean person. This is why some people just reject Christianity. So this is all nonsense. They don't accept it. That means God is a nasty person. He only gives you one life, and then in that one life you have to be a Christian. If you're not a Christian, you're going to hell, or you're going to be destroyed and dead eternally. So if you ever read the different theories of what happens after you die in Christianity, it's confusing, because they say some souls are killed. They don't exist anymore, completely wiped out. And other souls are suffering eternally. That's all confusing, right? Well, make your mind up. Either they're suffering eternally or they're killed, right? But how can you kill the soul when it's eternal? So they don't understand so many things about the soul, and they don't understand so many things about God. But yet they claim to be experts. Actually, living entity is originally the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but due to his rebellious nature, he is conditioned within material nature. It really does not matter how these living entities or the superior entities of the Supreme Lord have come in contact with material nature. The Supreme Personality Godhead knows, however, how and why this actually took place. In the scriptures, the Lord says that those attracted by this material nature are undergoing a hard struggle for existence. But we should know it with certainty from the descriptions of these few verses that all transformations and influences of material nature by the three modes are also products of material nature. All transformations and variety in respect to living entities are due to the body. As far as spirit is concerned, living entities are all the same. Yeah, we're all eternal. It's not that some are not eternal and some are eternal. Okay, now we go to the next verse, 21. Karya karana kartritve hetur prakritir uchyate purusha sukhadukanam bhoktritve hetur uchyate. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Okay, now that's a significant verse. In other words, all these different transformations and influences of material nature by the three modes are productions of the material nature. Okay, but when it comes to the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world, depending on how we behave. Okay, in the purport, the different manifestations of body and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. There are 8,400,000 different species of life, and these varieties are creations of the material nature. They arise from the different sensual pleasures of the living entity, who thus desires to live in a body, live in this body or that body. When he is put in different bodies, he enjoys different kinds of happiness and distress. His material happiness and distress are due to his body, and not to himself as he is. In his original state, there's no doubt of enjoyment. In other words, the nature of the soul is to be constantly in ecstasy. Therefore, that is his real state. Because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there's no such thing. What's that? No such thing as conditioning by the material nature. It's suffering. In the spiritual world, there's no such thing. The spiritual world is pure. But in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire different kinds of pleasures for the body. It might be more clear to state that this body is the effect of the senses. The senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, the body and instrument senses, are offered by material nature, as will be clear in the next verse. The living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desire and activity. According to one's desires and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters, meaning different bodies. The being himself is the cause of his attaining such bodies and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. So it's not Krishna that's causing us to suffer. It's not Krishna who's causing us to have sense gratification. These are things that we are causing to ourselves. Once placed in a particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature, because the body, being matter, acts according to the laws of nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he's put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. So if you come to the farm, you'll see the dogs. What is their main activity? They love to chase a rubber disc. They'll play all day long. If you keep throwing the disc, they'll go and grab it and come back, and they'll fight with each other. And they love it, and they'll do it all day long. Have you seen that? That's a dog, right? You don't see him studying Bhagavad Gita. You don't see the dog, planting seeds and making them grow and anything. They love that disc. Right? And they'll play all day long if you keep throwing the disc. So, he cannot act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he's forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. But in all circumstances, the supersoul is with the individual soul. That is explained in the Vedas, Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.1, as follows. Dwa Suparna Sayuja Sakaya. The Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul, and in all circumstances is present as the supersoul or Paramatma. Now, if we understand just this one verse and purport, you get a panoramic view of being in this material world and the hint of how to get out of it. Okay, so then we read one more and then we'll stop. Purusha prakritisto hi punkte prakritijan guna karanam gunasangasya sadasad yoni janmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. This is probably one of the most important verses and purports in the Bhagavad Gita. This verse is very important for understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another, just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Due to his desire to lord it over material nature, he is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material desire, the entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, as a bug. This is going on. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. So, I'm going to ask you to look something up right now. Who's the owner? What's his name? The Australian guy is the owner of a lot of newspapers. And Fox News.
Rupert Murdoch.
Right, look him up. He's been married about, I think, like 10 times. And he's over 90 years old right now. He just got married, and he says, well, this is the last one. So I better make the best of it. You see? I mean, he's a lot smarter than other people because, he always has a marriage contract when he gets married to a new lady. That means that they can't sue him for all his money if there's a divorce. They can only get so much money if he decides to get a divorce. What's it say?
Fifth time.
Huh? Go ahead, speak in the microphone.
No, it says fifth. It's fifth time.
Okay, read it.
So it says Rupert Murdoch to marry for fifth time at 92.
How many time? Fifth?
Fifth.
Only 5. I underestimated. Overestimated. Go ahead.
And then he says, I knew this would be my last. So he says the billionaire Mughal Rupert Murdoch, whose conservative media empire spans the globe, is engaged to marry for the 5th time, he told in an interview in his own tabloid newspaper, the New York Post. I was very nervous. I dreaded falling in love. But I knew this would be my last. It better be. I'm happy. Murdoch, 92, said of his new fiancée, Anne Leslie Smith, who's 66 years old.
92 years old and he's getting married. What's wrong with that? He should be worried about dying. And what consciousness is he going to have at the moment of death? See, they have no knowledge at all. Billionaires, powerful people, and all they do is the same thing that dogs do. The dog's running after that red disc, and he's running after another wife. What's the difference? There's no difference. Okay. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. While Rupert is associating with the mode of passion and ignorance. One has to rise, therefore, above the 3 material modes and become situated in the transcendental position. That is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here. Arjuna is hearing the science of God from Krishna. The living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long-cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately, as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. In a Vedic mantra, it is said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he proportionately relishes his eternal blissful life. So, there you are. You just understand this one purport that summarizes everything of how to be liberated in this lifetime. This is how powerful Bhagavad Gita is. Now, have you read this before? Have you understood it?
No.
That's right. That's why we're going over it.
Definitely totally new understanding when I'm reading now.
Yeah.
Really fascinated with this.
Yeah. This is a very powerful chapter. All right, we'll stop right there. Are there any questions? Every day we do the summary of what we've studied already, and then we go up, we go another few verses, because this is very, very, let's say, substantive knowledge, very powerful knowledge. Yes.
Yes, Maharaj. I mean, I agree. So first time whenever I read it, and now after I reading again or again, suppose you are explaining, I feel like there's some base. We read first time, it creates some base. Again read it or hear it, we get an. That's why people always get new perspective or new understanding, right? Every time it keep adding into your understanding, so slowly growing. So that's how. So my question, Maharaj, about the second 13:21 verse we read, right? So once it put into
The body.
body, it has to
That's it.
act
You-
as
that's
per the
it.
body.
Yeah, you're stuck.
Yeah. So like when I compare the human being and an animal, like as you are giving the example of a dog, so soul is put into the dogs, he acts in a certain way for sure. Like every dog like to have play like a disc or they'll do similar activity.
Oh no, but humans.
But human is different, right? So if you put my behavior, then Aditya Prabhu's, then yeah, so other people. So it totally, no two individual acts same way. They are acting totally different way. So I don't understand that.
That's not true.
Is it because?
That's not true. The majority of people are acting, being under the modes of nature, and they're looking for sense gratification all over the place. Why, you get off an airplane and right away you're in a shopping mall with liquor and perfumes and all that junk. That's because people are buying that stuff, right? And you go at the checkout counter at the Safeway and they have all these nonsense magazines. That means people are buying them. And you have so much nonsense products there, sodas and chiclets and gum and this thing and that thing. See, so people are engaged in sense gratification. Their activities are predictable. They're eating, sleeping, mating, and defending like animals. It's like 99% of the population of the world.
Yeah.
So don't say that each one is different. Almost the whole society is engaged in sense gratificatory activities. Very few people are giving those things up and being engaged only in spiritual activities. That's the way you should see things. There's no difference between the dog chasing the red disc and people going to Cancun, Mexico to have sense gratification. There's no difference. It's predictable, their behavior.
Yeah. And one verse before that, like 13:20, I think. So we talked about, the energy, right? So we are
You have energy, like you volunteer for the Holy Festival, and you work really hard, and you move things around, you pick things up, you clean things, you cook. So that's energy. You're expanding. You're using your energy. That's coming from the soul.
Yeah, so there is there I'm trying to understand that there's a subtle difference between energy and expansion, because Krishna has energy and he has expansions.
No, expansion means it's himself. You're the energy. You're not. You're also an expansion, but you're a unique person. But Krishna is expanding himself. You can't expand yourself except maybe in the form of having children. You're expanding yourself in one sense, but it's not. But your child is a different person. In the case of Krishna, it's the same person, although he's expanded millions and millions of times.
So energy, Maharaj, can't be visible. I mean, at least that's my understanding. Like, for example, you say electric energy.
We see your energy. You're talking right now. You're going to get up and walk.
Yeah, when you transform into something, start reacting to outside things, then you can feel that. Same way, like, I think in yoga system, they say that the Kundalini energy, there's an energy, but it acts on outside world outside the bhautik
Don't
things.
talk about Kundalini. You are walking and talking. That is your energy. Now you're going to use that energy either for sense gratification or you're going to use it to please Krishna's senses. That's it. Those are the two choices you have. So if you use it for pleasing Krishna's senses, you go back to Godhead. If you use it to please your own senses or somebody else's senses for sense gratification, you stay in the material world. It's very simple. It's not complicated. Okay, so then we can stop, unless there's another question.
So, Maharaj, one thing. We understand that Krishna directly descended as Krishna in the battlefield Kurukshetra, no Maharaj. So, but here Prabhupada is writing, Arjuna is hearing the signs of God from Krishna. So, why is he mentioning
Krishna
in that way?
speaking the Bhagavad Gita.
Why is he writing like Arjuna is hearing the signs of God from Krishna, as if a different person
Krishna
is?
is God.
He's writing as if he's talking about a different person.
No, he's talking about the same person, but before he didn't realize that Krishna is God. Now he's realizing that he's God.
Okay.
But it's in the 10th chapter he realizes Krishna is God. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitam, Paramam, Bhavam, Purusham Sasvatam Divyam, Adidevam Acham Vibhu. Right, 10th chapter, where it says, verse number 12 and 13. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is 10th chapter, verses 12 and 13. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's speaking to Krishna, right? The ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. All the great sages such as Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyasa confirm this truth about you, and now you yourself are declaring it to me. There you are. It took him 10 chapters. He's no longer Krishna's a cousin, brother, or a member of our family, or anything. He's the Supreme Personality of God. And he's God. And he's speaking to Arjuna, the absolute truth. Okay? All right, so...
Maharaj, there was an online question yesterday.
Yeah?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. The online question from yesterday is, how do we understand people who are saintly versus where people makes them as God, like Shirdi Sai Baba?
Yeah. Well, that's, okay, you have to know the history of Shirdi Sai Baba. Shirdi Sai Baba was a Muslim, but he was acting like a sadhu. So the Muslims did not accept him as a sadhu. The Hindus did. And he was living in a abandoned mosque that was falling apart. So once he got a following, he said, let's build a temple for Gopal or Govinda. And they said, yeah. So they're rebuilding the broken down mosque to make it into a temple for Krishna. And then he dies. So then they decide, instead of putting Krishna, they'll put Sai Baba. That's how it happened. If you read the Sai Charitam, that's all explained there. So I mean, he didn't want it. He didn't want himself to be on the altar, but they put him on the altar, and they built this whole hoax, of Sri Desai. That just shows you. I mean, the Muslims didn't do that. The Hindus did it. So, and that's not the only one. They did the same thing in the with what's the name? Well, it's happened a lot. Like Ramakrishna. See, the point is they become God. There's no such thing as becoming God. Either you're God or you're not God. Right? Anyone who becomes God is a bogus person. So, same with the people that worship. No, that's another one. That's another Baba. No, it's the. What's their name? I forget. They have the big temples all over the world now. Swaminarayan. Yeah, they boosted him up to becoming God, Narayana. Right? He was a genuine yogi, right? He's not God. They made him into a god. So whenever anyone becomes a god, that means they're bogus. God is always God. It's not. He never becomes God.
There was a discussion, Brindra Prabhu was here, and then someone.
I mean, Maharaj, some people say that the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's we consider as an incarnation of God scripturally, but it is not known in a generic way, like Rama and Krishna were known. So, how do we use the scriptural references to
you
validate?
read the Adi Leela. It explains how they discovered that he's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You read the first 5 chapters of the Adi Leela. It's all explained there. They have they give you all the verses that show that he was actually prophesized to come, but as a Shana, as a hidden avatar, because he comes as a devotee, doesn't come as God. Because he realized he came as God many times, and then people keep forgetting. So this time he came as a devotee, to show them the right way of becoming a devotee.
I think there are a lot of scriptural references also.
Plenty of scriptural references.
Outside Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are a lot of references.
No, but in Bhagavatam, there's at least 3 or 4 references.
I think Vedas also somewhere they mention.
In the Vishnu Sahasranam Sotram, there's a Sotram about Lord Chaitanya. Right? And then there are many other references in other Vedic scriptures.
So Vishnu Sahasranam also is there, Maharaj?
Yeah, he's in the Vishnu Sahasranam Sutra. You didn't know that? I can show you.
So maybe Maharaj, if possible, in one of the sessions, if you can cover that set of verses or topic, that would be great.
I have that information.
Yeah.
I can do that tomorrow.
Radhika Gopinath Prabhu once actually, I remember he collected all these references in the presentation long back like 2-3 years or maybe 5 years.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a little rest. Day.